1666 and the occultic roots of the Jeffrey Epstein scandals. This presentation includes essential information for everyone who has trouble understanding all the Epstein scandals. So much of it just seems overwhelming, and so much shocking and disgusting, and really and truly, as one person said, it seems the West is run by Satanist pedophiles, and I don't think that's an exaggeration at all. But there's so much that will make sense after this presentation, and not just on Jeffrey Epstein scandals, but also what is going on with the Olympic opening ceremonies. Why is it that every single Olympics now, even the Winter Olympics, has to start with some occultic garbage? And as they seek to unite the world, they're trying to unite the world in what looks like occultic worship. And Italy's the venue for the latest Olympics. Now, you know that the Olympics are traditionally and officially, even if you go on the website, dedicated to Zeus. And the Olympic flame, they get straight from the sun, and they've even got the high priestess cult rebuilt at the temple of Hera, and they call on Apollo. The high priestess calls on Apollo to provide the flame, and they get the flame by using mirrors and igniting the torch, and that torch is taken all the way from Mount Olympus, from the Temple of Hera, through to where the venue is, in this case, in Milan. And then what on earth with this pentagram and so on? Why are they having this kind of symbolism? This is not accidental. And we actually had a presentation just on the occultic symbolism of the pentagram at one stage. But now, with all these Epstein files produced, and apparently they've released 3 million documents, and who knows how many hundreds of hours of videos, but they say there's more than that that still hasn't been released. And who knows what's in all those, but what we're discovering is sick and sordid. Well, you've got to go back to 1666 to just make sense of this. In 1666, Sabbatai Zevi declared himself to be the Messiah. And more than half of the world's Jewish population at that time, in the 17th century, came to accept and follow Zevi as their Messiah. Now, I was doing some research on this some time ago. I went on YouTube to find somebody giving a lecture on Sabbatai Zevi. And it was a Jewish professor who was invited to speak on the false Messiah, Sabbatai Zevi. And he spent his first part of the presentation really attacking his host. How dare you call it the false Messiah? He is the Messiah. And this is a recent professor angry that his title was put on the false Messiah. He said he's not false. He is the true Messiah. So there are people even today, professors in universities, who really believe Sabbatai Zevi is the Messiah. Sabbatai Zevi proclaims salvation through sin. He was quite understandably condemned as a heretic by many of the contemporary rabbis of his day. And Jesus said in Matthew 24, "Take heed that no one deceives you. For many will come in my name, saying, 'I am the Christ,' and they will mislead many. Then if anyone says to you, 'Behold, here is the Christ,' or 'There he is,' do not believe him. For false Christs and false prophets will arise and will show great signs and wonders, so as to mislead, if possible, even the elect." So that's in Matthew 24. Our Lord warned us. Now, Sabbatai Zevi was born on the 1st of August, 1626, in Anatolia, what today we call Turkey, although at one time it was, of course, the Byzantine Empire or Asia Minor. He was a Sephardic Jew, ordained a rabbi in Smyrna, what today is called Izmir in Turkey. Smyrna, of course, being famous as where the Apostle John ministered and where Polycarp was martyred. Sabbatai Zevi was active throughout the Ottoman Turkish Empire, teaching from the Talmud and from the Kabbalah. Now, many people think, rabbis are teaching from the Old Testament. Not so. Most today are teaching from the Talmud and the Kabbalah, which came from Babylon, actually. Sabbatai Zevi's message of redemption through sin was enthusiastically received by many. And can you imagine how popular this kind of message would be today? And it is super popular with a certain section of society. Redemption through sin. Fast days became days of feasting. Sexual promiscuity, adultery, incest, and orgies were all accepted, because Zevi taught every law was to be broken. Every law must be broken. Religious taboos, such as against eating of pork and every form of sexual immorality, was not only permitted but encouraged. That was Sabbatai Zevi's emphasis. Sabbatai Zevi was described by his contemporaries as exceptionally charismatic. He's a rabbi, he's a Kabbalist, he's an eccentric mystic. That's the way people described him. He attained a massive following. More than 1 million devotees followed him during his lifetime. And the publication of the Lurianic Kabbalah made Zevi extraordinarily popular in the 17th century, the 1600s. Amongst the Jewish people throughout Europe and the Ottoman Empire, he was the most popular preacher of his day. The Lurianic Kabbalah promoted an occultic, deeper meaning for Jewish mysticism. It drew mostly from ancient Babylonian occultism and numerology. Sabbatai Zevi emphasized the magical, supernatural relationship between events and time through letters and numbers. The numerological value of dates contributed greatly to the widely held expectations and hopes that the Jewish Messiah would arrive on the 18th day, 6 plus 6 plus 6, of the 6th month of the year 1666. One eyewitness, Rabbi Leah ben Ozer, wrote, Levi was handsome, possessed of an enchanting presence and a singing voice. He wrote there was none like Zevi in stature, and his face burned with intensity like fire. Many of his contemporaries claimed to have been converted to following Zevi when he appeared to them in dreams by the side of their beds. One wonders what on earth that was. Professor Gershom Shalom explained that a sincere expectation had arisen in the psyche of many of the Jews that their Messiah would come and lead them back to establishing a Jewish homeland. And according to some critical interpretations of his behavior, Sabbatai showed signs of what modern scholars call manic depressive psychosis. He displayed publicly ecstatic behavior, often followed by bouts of depression and seclusion. So like Big Dipper, way up there, like bouncing on the clouds and then in the depths the next day. However, many of his modern-day followers argue that his behavior was simply what you would expect from religious mystics such as a Sufi. Now, to understand the Sufis, you can divide Islam into three main groups. There's the Shiites, such as you find in Iran. They don't care so much what the Quran says. The important thing is what the Ayatollah says, what the Imam says. They follow religious hierarchy, authority, sort of like our Roman Catholic, listen to the cardinal, the bishop, the archbishop, the pope. That's the important thing. The Sunni are like our Protestants. It's all about the Quran. And then the Sufi are like the charismatics. The important thing is a miracle a day keeps the devil away, and sword-swallowing, fire-breathing, miracle-type character. So that's the Sufis. So he came from the Sufi side of mysticism. Lots of meditative chanting, trances, ecstatic dancing. According to Professor Abraham El-Koham, a faculty member of the Jewish philosophy department at Bar Ilan University in Israel, Sabbatai frequently engaged in Bektashi Sufi rituals, which includes things like cutting your tongue. And who would want to do that? In fact, Sabbatai Zevi's grave site in Albania remains a Sufi shrine to this day. People go there on pilgrimages. Zevi's societal immorality and his religiously unacceptable behavior led to him being expelled from Smyrna around 1650. Not surprising. I mean, who would want someone teaching like this in your neighborhood? For years, he wandered throughout Greece, Thrace, Egypt, and Syria. However, in 1665, his life changed forever. He met a healer, Rabbi Nathan of Gaza in Palestine. He went to him to be healed from his depression because he suffered deep, dark, black types of depression when, he even despaired of life itself. And Rabbi Nathan of Gaza persuaded him he was indeed the Messiah who would usher in a new age. And Rabbi Nathan convinced Sabbatai Zevi he needed to formally reveal himself in the year 1666 to fulfill Messianic prophecy. And Zevi soon gained further support from the diaspora by promising Jews a return to their homeland and a rebuilt temple in Jerusalem. Although Zevi received strong support and was very popular amongst Jewish people, the leading rabbis of Jerusalem rejected Sabbate's claims that he was the Messiah, not unreasonably. The rabbis of Jerusalem ordered him leave the city or be excommunicated. Now, personally, I think they should have said, you are excommunicated and you must leave the city. I mean, why not both? Why either or? Sabbatai returned to Turkey, where the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire allowed him free rein to build up a phenomenal following, which is quite extraordinary that the Sultan would have tolerated it. And Jews from all over the world, from as far afield as England to Persia, from Germany to Morocco, from Poland to Yemen, they poured into the Ottoman Empire to see, to hear, to meet their Messiah. He was the superstar of his age. However, after Sabbatai publicly proclaimed the next year the temple in Jerusalem would be rebuilt, the Sultan suddenly was galvanized into action. Doubtless he feared a revolt that would lead to this province declaring independence from the Ottoman Empire. Not exactly something that the Sultan was willing to tolerate. So the Sultan, Muhammad IV, confronted Sabbatai Zevi with a choice of either publicly convert to Islam or you will be beheaded. And he put it delicately, your head or the turban. Now the turban was a symbol of converting to Islam. It came as a shock to many of his supporters that their long supposed awaited Messiah denounced his Jewish faith on the spot, chose to wear the Islamic turban for the rest of his life, to keep his head, evidently. And Zevi publicly converted to Islam, adopted a new Muslim name, Aziz Mehmet Effendi, or the power of Muhammad. From then on, Zevi was on salary as a servant of the Sultan, with a cryptic title, Keeper of the Gate, whatever that means. Now, Zevi continued unabated with his messianic activities. He continued to receive the full support of the Islamic authorities and the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, which is also extraordinary. While Sabbatai's formal conversion to Islam dismayed and disillusioned many of his followers, many others took it as a sign to also convert to Islam while maintaining their Jewish identity. This is where the term crypto-Jews became, where you're secretly a Jew, but you are outwardly a Muslim. And of course, they were very much involved in mystical Kabbalah Sabbatean practices. One of these Sabbatean cults, primarily located in Anatolia, which is a province of modern-day Turkey, were called the Donmi, which translates to religious converts. Donmi was a derogatory term which nobody would ever use themselves. You know, it's like Methodists, which we were called Methodists as a term of derision by the students at Oxford University. They later took it as a badge of honor, but it wasn't meant as a positive word. Like even Puritans, that was an insult. They later took it upon themselves, but it was meant as an insult. And the Donmi were also a term of derision from the Muslims, but some of these crypto Jews who were pretend to be Muslims, but were really Sabbateans, they now start to use the term Donmi. The Sabbatean followers explained his apparent apostasy, religious treason actually, as a descent into the grossest reality or husks of creation in order to reclaim the lost sparks of divine light, whatever that means, to repair the world. Now, these Kabbalist concepts were used to justify his heretical, apostate, degenerate behavior. I mean, one of the worst things you can do in Judaism or Christianity is to deny your faith. So this is just extraordinary that their Messiah just rejected his faith and formally adopted, meaning he was bowing to Mecca 5 times a day, he was wearing the turban, and he was going to Islamic practices and all the rest of it. So this just seemed bizarre. But it's in accordance with Kabbalah's teachings. According to Reb Yaakov Lieb Hakahain, the current director of Donmi West, which is a Californian Sabbatean organization founded in 1972, Sabbatai's conversion to Islam was not an act of cowardice or apostasy. He didn't betray the Jewish people because his conversion was one of the mystical Masin Zarim that the Messiah was destined to perform upon their reading of the Kabbalah. Now, the Kabbalah, remember, is not biblical. It's occultic garbage from Babylon. In keeping with Isaac Lurie's prophecies in the Lurian Kabbalah, these actions of breaking laws, of being a false convert, of deception and degeneracy were essential to bring about conditions that would set the stage, initiate, or directly expedite the fulfillment of Jewish messianic prophecy. Jews were to play an active role in bringing forth God's kingdom on earth. And they would do this by infiltrating, subverting, and destroying every other religion, every other kingdom on earth. Think what the Bible says. Revelation 21, verse 8 makes it clear all liars will be condemned to the lake of fire. The cowardly, unbelieving, abominable, murderers, sexually immoral, sorcerers, idolaters, and all liars shall have their part in the lake of fire which burns with fire and brimstone, which is the second death. But we're meant to believe that even though he was being a liar, Sabbateanism was proving he really was the Messiah by these acts of deception. The Kabbalah teaches a mystical synthesis between pagan teachings, which preceded the Torah, and the Gnostic elements of Judaism. Remember, a lot of the threats to the early church was Gnosticism, which is attacked by many of the epistles in the New Testament. The Gnostics were a great enemy of the Apostle John in particular, who, by the way, ended his ministry in Smyrna. The task is not to destroy evil, they taught, but to return evil to its source. To include the left within the right, to uplift the fallen sparks. The Chaldean or Babylonian mysticism and occultism provided the most authentic version of the Kabbalah. So he's not referring to the books of Moses, the Torah at all. It's all the Kabbalah, it's all the Talmud. The new philosophical paradigm provided a spiritual justification for proactive Zionism to bring about the formation of a Jewish state, which would undermine and replace all other states worldwide. The mystical Lurianic Kabbalah transformed the Messiah from a popular conquering hero, a national hero, to a supreme cosmic conqueror. The goal was not merely the emancipation of Jews from the yoke of the Gentiles, but a fundamental transformation of the entirety of creation, affecting both the material and the spiritual world. This was to lead to, in the words of Gershom Shalom, a ratification of the primordial catastrophe of the breaking of the vessels, or Shirat HaKilim, or repairing the world. The goal was to break everything down so that it could be built back better. I don't know if that rings any bells in anyone's heads, but that was President Joe Biden's philosophy and his slogan, build back better. Well, they certainly were good at breaking down, but I'm not aware that they built anything, and certainly nothing under him was better. But build back better, yeah. That was the Biden and also quite a lot of the Pope Francis mentality. Pope Francis was called the anti-pope and antichrist by many Catholic friends of ours. I mean, we used to have a joke when people would ask an obvious question, you'd say, is the Pope Catholic? Well, in the case of Francis, there was a case of a Pope who was definitely not Catholic. According to Sabbateanism, the acts that God's people must take include deliberate forays into the world of sin, where the illusory nature of evil can more readily be exposed and the sparks elevated to their source. Again, whatever the dickens that means. With the declaration of Sabbateanism as the Messiah in 1666, the Zionist goal of infiltrating, subverting, ultimately replacing every other religion and kingdom, transforming every government on earth into a new world order, became the central focus. Rabbi Nathan of Gaza declared they were entering into a new age, where all religious laws prior to Sabbateanism were essentially obsolete. Now, traditional religious taboos like the eating of pork, which was forbidden by Jewish dietary law, was abolished. Former feast days fast days were now to be feast days. One of the oft-quoted prayers of Zevi was, "Blessed art thou, Lord our God, King of the universe, who makes the forbidden things permissible." Sabbateanism declared that his duty was to descend through the gates of impurity into the impure realm of Kelipot to rescue the divine spark still imprisoned there, whatever that means. The Messiah was constrained to commit strange acts, Mashim Zarim, which includes apostasy, adultery, theft, idolatry, deception, and covetousness. All of these breaking of every law of God was necessary for the fulfillment of the Messiah's mission. I mean, you can search the Old Testament in vain to find any of this. I mean, None of this is biblical. This is anti-biblical garbage, but this is what Sabbatean Zevi and Prophet Nathan taught. The psychology of the Sabbateans is utterly paradoxical. If it makes sense to you, you're probably on drugs. Essentially, its guiding principle was, whoever is as he appears cannot be a true believer. Now, this is an important point. In practice, it means true faith cannot be faith which men publicly profess. On the contrary, true faith must always be concealed. For a Sabbatean, it's their duty to deny their true faith outwardly. When you ask a person directly, are you a Sabbatean? He will say no. Because that's his duty, to deny his faith. Because your faith is a seed planted in the bed of the soul. It cannot grow until it's first been covered over. You've got to put a seed into the ground, it's got to die, you've got to cover it over. When it dies, then it can bring forth. So the theme of a secret, hidden, occultic identity became part of the Sabbatean religious philosophy. In essence, a true act cannot be committed publicly to be seen by the world. True faith, they call true faith, a true act must be concealed. Hence the secret society. Only through concealment could it negate the falsehood of what is explicit. Whatever is explicit is false. And so you can have someone like Barack Hussein Obama saying that he's a Christian, when obviously he was not. So through a revolution of values, what was formerly sacred became profane. What was formerly profane now becomes sacred. I hope that does make sense to you. Proverbs 19 verse 9 says, a false witness will not go unpunished. He who speaks lies shall perish. God will punish false witnesses. But this is what Sabbatean Zevi is teaching you to do, to be a false witness. The Sabbatean sect, which flourished during the lifetime of Sabbatean Zevi, afterwards continued to indulge in wife sharing. Apparently, I've heard that even in this country, there are parties where people go to where they literally have wife swapping. Can you imagine? Religious sex orgies, adultery and incest, all this was part and parcel of their normal life. It's thought by some scholars that Zevi had deep connections with the Baktashi Sufi order of Islam. Some similarities through the Sabbatean Donmi and the Baktashi Sufi practices include deliberate violation of halal or kashrut, and ritualistic group sex and wife swapping, ecstatic singing, chanting mystical Kabbalah, belief in a hidden occultic reading of the Torah and the Quran. It's not what's on the page. They find some deeper meaning into it, which might say the very opposite. And you can see this with people today in a church who even say, yes, we know the Bible forbids homosexuality, but somehow or another under it they find what the Bible condemns actually is commanded, and so on. And so you get people like this today, and this is where it starts. The Sabbateans in Salonika, what we would call Thessalonica, regularly held a celebration on the 22nd day of the Hebrew month of Adar, known as the Festival of the Lamb. This festival included getting drunk, extinguishing all the lights, and in total darkness, there was religious sexual violations of the sanctity of marriage and incest. Their teaching was that as a grain of wheat must rot in the earth before it can sprout, so the deeds of believers must become fully rotten before they can germinate in salvation. You have to become rotten in order to be saved. This conveys the Sabbatean theology in a nutshell. Salvation comes through sin. Redemption is achieved through deception. That's at the heart of it. But in James we read, don't you know that friendship with the world is enmity, hostility to God? Whoever therefore wants to be a friend of the world makes himself an enemy of God. I mean, how straightforward can that be? James 4 verse 4. According to Gershom Shalom, who's a major Jewish authority on Sabbateanism, he says Sabbateanism is the matrix of every significant movement to have emerged from the 18th and 19th century. From Hasidism to Reformed Judaism to Freemasonry to Marxist revolutionary communism, they all have their roots in Sabbateanism. Now, when you hear the word Reformed Judaism, you get confused, because when we think of Reformed Christians, we think of going back to the Bible. But Reformed Judaism is the opposite. They go far away from the Torah. For example, the Bible explicitly forbids tattoos, and there's many Jewish cemeteries in the world where you cannot be buried if you have a tattoo in this Jewish cemetery. And yet, you can see Reformed Judaism encourages tattoos, The Bible expressly condemns homosexuality, and yet Reformed Judaism embraces homosexuality. And people have even said Tel Aviv is the gay capital of the world. And the Israeli government, Foreign Affairs, puts in millions every year into advertising and promoting homosexual tourism to Tel Aviv and hosting gay pride marches and so on in Tel Aviv. Now, we've got a government in Cape Town, the DA, who have gay pride marches each year which are funded by the city. I don't know if we'll have next year or this year. Last year it still happened, but that was when USAID still existed. But the money for this came from the USAID. So maybe that'll end. Maybe the DA need to, because they got funding from the USAID in order to fund it. But this kind of, imagine governments wasting taxpayers' money to promote homosexual pride. And I always thought pride was one of the 7 deadly sins, and that pride comes before fall, and pride comes before destruction, haughty spirit before destruction. And so Reformed Judaism includes homosexual Jews, LGBTQ Jews, which is a contradiction. You know, what do you think Moses or Elijah would have done with such? Just for example. I think many Jews would see this as blasphemous. But we also have Freemasonry. Freemasonry is very big and bold and popular. Freemasonry apparently also draws a lot from the Sabbateanism. And super powerful. Notice the occultic symbolism throughout these. They like the, do you remember the Democratic Republic of Germany, or DDR? What was in the center of their flag? They had this Freemasonry symbol. Freemasonry was at the heart and soul of the Communist Party of East Germany. Notice the plumb line. Does this symbol here look anything like the Milan Olympics opening symbol? And the different types of pillars, they've got all these kind of occultic symbols are parts of Freemasonry. And you can see at some Freemasonry lodges, and I've seen this as well, they will have the all-seeing eye. And you might have also heard of the Young Turks who revolutionized the Ottoman Empire. Now, the Young Turks who turned the Ottoman Empire upside down and turned into what today is modern-day Turkey is believed to be the Sabbateans. In fact, it explains the hostility to Christians and how they murdered hundreds of thousands of Christians in the last Christian city in Asia, which is Smyrna. Destruction of Smyrna in 1922, done by Ataturk, who was believed to be a Sabbatean. In other words, he pretended to be a Muslim, but actually he was a Sabbatean, one of these false converts. And there's a lot of evidence of that the Young Turks, under Ataturk, with him leading, who brought down the Ottoman Sultanate and ended the Sultanate, the Ottoman Empire, and brought about modern-day Turkey over the blood of how many millions of Christians murdered. Greek Orthodox, Armenians, Assyrian Christians wiped out in great numbers, the Armenian genocide being just part of it. But this was work done by Sabbateans in the name of Islam. Sabbatean believers teach that they are champions of a new world order, which will be established by overthrowing the values of all other religions and all kingdoms. Now, 50 years after the death of Sabbatai Zevi, Jacob Frank was born, and he became the prophet, or we should say the false prophet, of Sabbatai Zevi. Jerry Rebo, in his book, The Untold Story of 50 Jewish Messiahs, reported that Jacob Frank believed he was the reincarnation of Sabbatai Zevi. And by the way, that Sabbatai Zevi was the reincarnation of Jacob in the Bible, so hence he was called Jacob Frank. And so Jacob Frank is the reincarnation of both Sabbatai Zevi and the original Jacob of the Bible. Jacob Frank continued and extended the paradoxical teachings of Sabbatai Zevi, declaring that with the coming of the Messianic age, Zevi had transformed all sexual prohibitions of the Bible into permissions and obligations. The only way to purify your soul is through sexual immorality and orgies. Debauchery is therapy. Does this not sound like so much of what's going on in the world today? Debauchery is therapy. Jacob Frank asserted the God of the Bible is evil. Jews need to reject every moral law, every commandment. And the only way to a new world order is through the total destruction of Christian civilization. He taught that explicitly. Jacob Frank insisted that child sacrifice, rape, incest, drinking of blood was perfectly acceptable and necessary for religious rituals. Is this helping anyone understand Jeffrey Epstein? Salvation is through sin. Redemption is achieved through deception. But the Bible says in Proverbs 12, verse 22, lying lips are an abomination to the Lord, but those who deal truthfully are his delight. It cannot ever be that you can achieve good through lying. Lying lips cannot achieve God's will. Jacob Frank convinced his followers the only way for their special form of Judaism, or Sabbateanism, to survive was for them to outwardly become Christians, just as the Donmi had descended into the world of Islam. So if you're living in a majority Catholic country, you must convert to Catholicism, pretend to be Catholic. If you live in a Protestant country, you must convert to Protestantism and pretend to be a Protestant. If you live in an Islamic country, you must convert to Islam and pretend to be a Muslim. Well, Jewish authorities in Poland excommunicated Frank and his followers and rejected his concepts of purification through transgression. Jacob Frank converted to both Islam and to Roman Catholicism. You wonder why we've had so many of the problems and scandals in our churches as we've got today. You wonder how many of them are actually Sabbateans. He held annual springtime lamb festivals, which consisted of drug use, sacrifice, nudity, the exchanges of spouses and daughters for immoral religious sex. Frank preached that true Christian believers, true Jewish believers, were to cross every boundary, transgress every taboo, mix the sacred with the profane. Eve Frank, his daughter, was called the holy matron of the Sabbatean movement, and she served as the central figure in the sexual rituals of the sect in Poland. I mean, what kind of father does that? And yet, have you seen how many even royal families in Europe have taken their sons and daughters to Jeffrey Epstein's island and entrust them? In many cases, it seems that the parents brought their children to Epstein's island for Epstein, for Jeffrey Epstein to orientate, train, and so on. We've got ridiculous news from the Epstein files that have come out that the princess, the crown princess of Norway, asked Jeffrey Epstein if it was acceptable and appropriate for her to put pictures of naked women as wallpaper in her 15-year-old son's bedroom. I mean, asking Jeffrey Epstein, a convicted sex offender, for advice on how to raise your son, and a princess of a royal house does that? Jeremiah 17:9 says, the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it? That explains so much of what's going on here. The Epstein files prove the depravity of man, the deceitfulness of the human heart. Now, Jacob Frank had approximately 50,000 disciples. You wouldn't have thought so many people would support such sick, sordid, satanic garbage, but 50,000. Although his following was smaller than that of Sabbateanism, Jacob Frank's cult would become far more influential because it recruited some of Europe's most influential royalty, nobility, and the richest bankers on earth. And this is the difference. If you think of impact, it's not how many numbers in a big church, it's how many bankers, members of parliament, ambassadors, princes, and so on, CEOs of companies. Gershom Shalom described Jacob Frank as one of the most frightening phenomenon in the whole of Jewish history, a religious leader who, for whether purely selfish motives or otherwise, was in all his actions a truly corrupt and degenerate individual. Jacob Frank taught that one has to free oneself from all laws, all conventions, all religions, adopt every conceivable attitude and reject it, to follow their Messiah step by step into the abyss. And that's a quote, into the abyss. The annihilation of every religion was the true way. In order to ascend, you must first descend. No man can climb a mountain unless he's first descended to the base of that mountain. Therefore, we must descend and be cast down to the bottom rung. Only then can we climb up to the infinite, he taught. This is the principle of what he called Jacob's ladder, which he says is shaped like a V. I did not come into this world to lift you up, but rather to cast you down to the bottom of the abyss, which in the Bible is used as a synonym for hell. Jacob Frank taught antinomianism. That's a rejection of all law. Anti-nomos. Nomos, law, anti-hostility to. So antinomianism. hostility to God's law. But I've come across pastors, even professors of Bible colleges in this country, who are openly antinomian and even say that they're against the law. Now, funnily enough, they're the same people who criticize me for breaking government laws by smuggling Bibles into communist countries. These people who don't believe in borders, who believe in open borders, but I crossed the border illegally to take Bibles into Angola or Mozambique and so on. And they criticize me for breaking the law, but they teach that you can break God's law, while they condemn missionaries for breaking man's law to obey God's law. They also teach libertinism, or the rejection of all authority. He demanded from his followers voluntary abasement and utter shamelessness. This is important to understand the Epstein class. A Sabbatean needs to be able to commit every sin without any sense of shame, remorse, or guilt. A sign of a Christian is, God have mercy on me, a sinner. And the things I don't want to do, I do, and the things I want to do, I don't do. There's this hatred of oneself when one does badly and one breaks God's law. That's a sign of a believer. But the Sabbatean taught you should have no shame, no guilt, no sense of remorse whatsoever. Jacob Frank's Kabbalist interpretations led to nihilism, or nothingness. He taught that you conquer through deception. This reminds you of what Vladimir Lenin said. Treaties are like pie crusts made to be broken. To tell the truth is a petty bourgeois habit, but to lie and to lie convincingly is a sign of superior intelligence. So the communists teach you must be a master of deception and you must lie. And that's Sabbateanism. Frank taught that Israel's exile was not a consequence of its sins at all, but it was part of a plan to bring about the destruction of all Gentiles throughout the world. To establish a Jewish state back in Palestine was not sufficient. The whole world order, especially Christian Europe, must be subverted and destroyed. In his classic book, To Eliminate the Opiate, now you know where this term comes from, Karl Marx spoke of religion as the opiate of the masses. So to eliminate the opiate literally means to eliminate religion. So this was written by Rabbi Marvin Antelman. He revealed Jacob Frank got his financing from the Rothschild financial empire based in Frankfurt, and his worldwide influence by his alliance with Adam Weishaupt, who is the founder of the Illuminati. So these are the new trinity of Sabbateanism. Jacob Frank, the self-proclaimed reincarnation of the Messiah, Sabbatai Zevi, also claimed to be reincarnation of the biblical patriarch Jacob. Adam Weishaupt, born to Jewish parents but raised Catholic, a Jesuit professor of canon law. By the way, the Jesuits are the secret police of the Vatican. And Pope Francis was the first Jesuit pope. And the Jesuits are basically a secret police. They are like the KGB of the Vatican. The Jesuits literally trained their people to compromise others, to go into Bible colleges and to break down pastors' morals, to get them to commit immorality, to scandalize, to assassinate. Jesuits, for example, assassinated Prince William of Orange, who is the father of Dutch liberties, after whom we've named our Orange River and Orange Free State. And so Jesuits have been assassins, they've been honey trap characters who've broken down different Protestant ministries by going in to create scandals. It's included nuns who go and seduce priests. It's included homosexuals who go to break down people in ministry. So the Jesuits are a very deceitful arm of an extreme part of Catholicism. Adam Weishaupt was also a German philosopher. He is the founder of the Order of the Illuminati in 1776. Amschel Meyer Rothschild was an extremely wealthy German Jewish banker, and he was close to the Orthodox Jewish circles, but he is referred to by the East European Jews as the pious Rothschild. So he had a pretense of being true to his religion while he went into alliance with the Sabbateans. When Jacob Frank entered Frankfurt, an alliance had already begun between Meyer Amschel Rothschild, the immensely wealthy banker of Frankfurt, and Adam Weishaupt, who was the son of a Jewish Kabbalist rabbi in Bavaria, or Bayern. Educated by Jesuits, Weishaupt became a Roman Catholic priest and formed an alliance with Meyer Rothschild. On the 1st of May, 1776, Weishaupt chose the timing to launch the Illuminati in accordance with Sabbatean Kabbalist teachings. He chose the 1st of May because May is the 5th month, added to the first day equals 6. He chose 1776 because the 4 numbers of that year added up to 21. 1 plus 7 plus 7 plus 6 equals 21. And the sacred numbers 6 and 21 equals 27, another sacred number with Kabbalist powers. They believed this because it's formed by multiplying 3 times 9. 3 and 9, both powerful numbers, and so 27, super powerful. So, powerful muti for affecting world history. Weishaupt carefully chose this date because he believed that even the greatest plans would be doomed to failure if not carried out at the most numerically advantageous time. This helps you understand the significance of 9/11, for example, the timing of it. In the 18th century, Meyer Amschel Bauer, later renamed Rothschild, adopted the hexagon as a symbol on his red shield. The 6-pointed star hexagon was adopted by the Rothschild family and put on their coat of arms. Meyer Amschel Bauer, who later changed his name to Rothschild or Red Shield, lived between 1744 and 1812. He had 5 sons: Amschel Meyer, who remained in Frankfurt; Solomon Meyer, who settled in Vienna, in Austria; Nathan Meyer, who settled in London, England; Karl Meyer, who settled in Naples, Italy; and James Meyer, who settled in Paris. And they all opened up national banks. Since the 17th century, the House of Rothschild has dominated the banking houses of Europe. When people come up to things like the South African entrepreneur is the richest man in the world. Sorry? No, who's SpaceX? So Elon Musk is the richest man in the world. Rubbish. I mean, generational wealth of the Rothschilds exceeds it, but the Rothschilds know how to hide things, and they just keep repeating, it's like distraction. Elon Musk is the richest man in the world. Well, he may be a super rich man, but he's not the richest man in the world. He can't exceed the Rothschilds' wealth. But it just shows the way how, if you repeat something often enough, it's a great distraction. Now, the Rothschilds continue through history. To our day, we've still got a Jacob and a Philippine Rothschild. Nathan Rothschild once said, "I care not what puppet is placed on the throne of England to rule the empire on which the sun never sets. The man who controls Britain's money supply controls the British Empire, and I control the British money supply." Whoever controls the issuance of money controls the government. And so that is significant comment. Adam Weishaupt and Meyer Rothschild and Jacob Frank launched the Illuminati on the 1st of May, 1776 in Frankfurt with the long-term political goals of, see if this rings any bells, abolish all monarchies and all governments, abolish private property and inheritances, abolish nationalism, abolish the family. I mean, as goes the family, so goes the nation. Abolish the institution of marriage, which is the glue that holds it all together. Abolish all religion. Establish compulsory communal education, read indoctrination for all children. Now, anyone who's read Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto of 1848 will immediately recognize the Illuminati agenda of 1776, clearly articulated. And the Protocols of Zion, some people question its authenticity, but it certainly is accurate as far as how governments are broken down, how countries are debased. And so whatever the origin of this, it certainly reflects strategies that have been used over and over and over to break down countries. Think of their symbolism. There's hidden Masonic symbols in the Washington map. Look at the directions and angles of the streets, absolutely extraordinary. You don't just have to look at the DDR's flag with the Masonic symbols. Just looking at the map of Washington, D.C., you can see it forms a cube, it forms Kabbalic symbols of the distance between, both the distance and angles between the House of Congress, the White House, the Washington Monument, all these different things. They've got it carefully laid out, like the Mall of Washington, D.C., that everything's built along. And I've walked along this mall many a time, and it's extraordinary, the symbolism that they've written into everything. Just look at the American dollar note. You've got the Illuminati Eye, the great architect, Lucifer, the all-seeing eye. You've got 13 layers of brick, 13 original colonies, 72 bricks, 72 powers of the name of God in the Kabbalah, New World Order, Novus Ordem Seclorum, secular New Order. You have got E Pluribus Unum, 13 letters and a motto, one out of many, 13 illuminated stars, 13 enlightened colonies. You've got, notice that's not an eagle in the middle. That is a phoenix rising out of the ashes. You know, build back better. I once heard one of these Kabbalists declare at a public meeting, out of the ashes of Pretoria will arise the new South Africa. I mean, who thinks like that? 9 tail feathers, 9 spheres risen through to return to the heavenly state. 13 arrows, 13 leaves, 13 berries. I mean, all this interesting. Even the Roman numerals there that they've got of the MDCCLXXV1, which is 1776, you can form the numbers there of 666. This is on a $1 bill, about as common a symbol, just showing at the very beginning, we were here, we control you. All kinds of symbols of Illuminati, and you see it in the Bilderberger Group, World Economic Forum, Davos. For out of the heart proceed evil thoughts, murders, adulteries, fornications, thefts, false witnesses, blasphemies. Matthew 15:19. Here's some of the descendants hierarchy of the Rothschilds. On one side, the Rothschilds went to Karl Marx, and the other side went to the Rothschild family. And so you can see you've got both communism and you've got the modern Rothschild dynasty. Theodor Herzl is known as the father of the Jewish state, and he's the one who set up the first Zionist Council, Congress, which was held in Basel, in Switzerland, and out of this came the whole idea of re-establishing a state. Now, he was an advocate for Uganda to be the place, and the British government was willing to give them Uganda. But he died in a mysterious way, and his successor chose, no, we're going to go back to the original state of Israel, back to Palestine, back to roots. And these are some of the depictions of the Zionist congresses at Basel. I'm told by some students that they believe Theodor Herzl was a Sabbatean, but he's a secular Sabbatean. Now, he espoused secularism, but he became the father of the Jewish state. It's interesting to note that they did not return in repentance to Yahweh. They returned as secular. They legalized everything from abortion, pornography. I've heard from the head of the pro-life movement in Israel, who came to our mission here, that said, we kill more Jewish babies in Israel every year through abortion than the Nazis killed in the camps. I mean, it's just staggering to think, now that's from a Jewish pro-life leader. The state of Israel today is not a theocratic state. It's not a Mosaic state. It's not respecting God's laws. There are many Orthodox Jews who hate and reject the state of Israel because it's so godless. There's apparently more prostitutes than believers in Jerusalem, for example. And the immorality in the state is so gross, extremely immoral. But it's not thought that Herzl would approve of the present symbol. He wanted the menorah, the candlestick, to be the symbol in the Jewish flag. But Rothschild insisted it must be his star. And I don't think Herzl would approve of what's been done in his name. But there's an interesting book called The Tower of Basel. We all know about the Tower of Babel, but Basel is where the secret bank that runs the world basically is based, and that's where the first Zionist congresses were held. There's a book on the international bankers, World War I, World War II, and beyond, stating that they already worked out in Basel that they will need world wars to weaken Europe, to bring about removing so many of the people who've gone into Europe to find comfortable lives for themselves and their children, that to create their states that they wanted to do in the Middle East, they'd have to break down Europe, and these world wars were essential. You've got to get the Christians to kill one another. And there's a lot of evidence to support Freemasonry involvement in it. Also intriguing is there's a book out claiming that the Warburgs, Deutsche Bank, all run by Zionists, were the main financiers of the NSDAP party. That National Socialist Party was heavily funded by Jewish bankers because they perceived this is a way of making life uncomfortable for the people who want to stay in comfort and in wealth in Europe, to be willing to move out to the Middle East, to our new planned state in what at that time was called Palestine under the Ottoman Empire. But also intriguing, Lenny Brenner's book, Zionism in the Age of Dictators, showing, for example, how there were coins that were minted with a Jewish star on the one side and the Hakenkreuz, the swastika on the back. Extraordinary, because there was an agreement between the Zionists and National Socialists in Germany that, you know, we've got to make things uncomfortable to get the Jews out of Germany. We don't want them living in comfort here. We want them in the Middle East where we need them to create this new state, which is going to be a secular state. Now, it's impossible to understand cancel culture, Black Lives Matter, the LGBTQ, gender confusion, lockdown lunacy, the masquerade madness, the COVID cult, the salvation by vaccination, the Christophobia, without understanding the Sabbatean roots of the New World Disorder. Nor can you understand Hollywood degeneracy, indoctrination through what they call education, the mainstream, lamestream media, the United Nations, the EU or European Union pronouncements, and the activities. If you don't understand Sabbatean teachings, practice, and strategy, none of these things make sense. But when you understand what Sabbateanism teaches and what Jacob Frank taught, then you can suddenly see the logic behind the imbecilic, self-destructive national suicides, demographic suicides going on throughout Europe, the idiocy of what they've been doing in America. I mean, just think of the many ways in which Jeffrey Epstein epitomized the Sabbatean religion. He is the epitome of Frankism and Sabbateanism. The weird cubic temple with the Islamic-type dome on Jeffrey Epstein's island, which reportedly led down to an underground chamber, which has been described as a rape dungeon and a Luciferian temple. They had a lift going down into this dungeon underneath. Notice this temple on Orgy Island. The same owl from the Bohemian Grove. And by the way, if you look close enough, on the back of a $1 bill, you can see a very small owl. The owl is the symbol of the Bohemian Grove, and it's the same owl that's on the US $1 note. The owl is a symbol of the Illuminati. And you just think of all the things that happened. The building is painted with unusual blue and white stripes, which is the same colors as the flag of the State of Israel. And these owls on top. Jeffrey Epstein certainly seems to epitomize the Sabbatean philosophy of unrestrained sexual debauchery and deception. Virginia Roberts Guthrie produced the book Nobody's Girl, which was published posthumously, if you believe that she committed suicide last year. I've got trouble believing that it was a suicide, but anyway, that's the kind of things people say. Virginia Roberts, when she is first recruited by Ghislaine Maxwell, Ruthless Pursuit, Nobody's Girl, a memoir of surviving abuse and fighting for justice. And then we've got a Cape Townian, Juliet Bryant, who's also come out recently giving stories of how she was recruited in 2002 in Cape Town at the Cape Grace Hotel. As we gave last week with pictures, Bill Clinton was present, as was Kevin Spacey, the major Hollywood star. They were here in Cape Town, and she was the only person who turned up for some modeling test, and she was recruited by Jeffrey Epstein, persuaded her to fly to New York, and then immediately she arrives in New York, she gets flown down to Jeffrey Epstein's island and abused, and she's got all kinds of stories, some of which are hard to believe, but she claims that her ovaries were harvested by Jeffrey Epstein. You know, Jeffrey Epstein approached several girls according to Epstein files released, who said that he wanted them to have his baby and he wanted designer babies and all sorts of bizarre things. What's also in the Epstein files is, remember this Madeleine McCain who was kidnapped, disappeared back in Portugal? What was that, 2007? And his poor parents. Well, at the time, an identikit of a suspect who may have been a kidnapper was produced, and people have recently pointed out, doesn't that look possibly like Ghislaine Maxwell? So possibly even this poor Madeleine McCain who was kidnapped could have ended up on Jeffrey Epstein's island. And by the way, if you go online, there's even people in Britain, such as a man who spent 26 years as a British policeman, he has a commissioner of police in Britain, saying he thinks there's a link between Madeleine McCain and number 10 Downing Street and with Jeffrey Epstein. Apparently, Gordon Brown, who was Chancellor of the Exchequer back when Tony Blair was Prime Minister in Britain, was heavily involved with Jeffrey Epstein, and Jeffrey Epstein came to 10 Downing Street. He knew Tony Blair, he knew Brown, Prime Minister Brown, later when he became Prime Minister as well. And Brown's brother was involved with actions at that time, swingers parties where they literally were doing wife swapping and all that stuff in Portugal at that very resort. Now, I don't know if any of that's true. I'm just saying this is what a British police officer, senior police officer of 26 years in the force, said his conclusion is that 10 Downing Street's involved in this whole thing with Jeffrey Epstein, one of the most famous British child abductions in history. But maybe Ghislaine Maxwell was involved too. But the amount of famous people connected with Jeffrey Epstein. Now, Jeffrey Epstein himself never graduated from college, but he does have links to universities because he is a major funder of AI research and all sorts of other things, including designer babies at universities. So he's still a funder of these universities, although he is a dropout. And he wanted to have people's eggs and ovaries harvested, and he was obsessed with eugenics, the idea of producing designer babies for who knows what purpose. You know that there were, in the Epstein files, there's pictures of dentist chairs and all of his accommodations, whether you're talking about the ranch in New Mexico, his accommodation in New York, which is the biggest, most expensive apartment in New York. By the way, he bought his apartment in New York for $70 million, which is more than he paid for the island. It was a massive apartment. So much so that Prince Andrew said that's why he stayed there, was because he was offered free accommodation there. And the amount of people, sick, sordid people, high up people involved with Jeffrey Epstein. And it's pretty bizarre. But it's not just Jeffrey Epstein. Think of the Hollywood producer, sexual predator and rapist Harvey Weinstein. And the amount of films you see, like Mandela Long Walk to Freedom, the first thing you see on the screen is a Weinstein production. And the man was one of the most influential Hollywood producers ever. Many of his highly influential friends, including world leaders, and of course, Oprah Winfrey, who is without a doubt involved in this kind of trafficking. I mean, just look at this picture. A real arm grip, and this terrified look on this poor young girl as she's introduced to Jeffrey Epstein. I mean, it's such a disgusting, lecherous picture. And so many people trusted Oprah Winfrey and liked her. But she is plainly involved with all these scandals here and a regular visitor to Jeffrey Epstein's island. When Mel Gibson brought out the film Sound of Freedom, it was accused of being a conspiracy theory, believing that children were being trafficked to influential people and that there was sexual abuse taking place on islands. And it was rejected as a conspiracy theory. Became a super successful film, though, and it's been now proven that there's nothing fictitious about this. Sound of Freedom is about a true story based on real events and real people. And it's been vindicated by what's in the Epstein files too. What's also been vindicated is books like One Nation Under Blackmail, that Jeffrey Epstein and his father-in-law were involved in massive blackmail operations. By the way, Kevin Spacey says that he traveled on Epstein's private jet without realizing that it was owned by Jeffrey Epstein. Now, I think these private planes are quite small. It's very hard to think you can be in the plane and not know whose plane it is. He said he came out to Cape Town on a humanitarian mission, and he didn't realize that it was Jeffrey Epstein's plane. That's the 2002 trip when the local Cape Townian girl, Juliet Bryant, was trafficked. Now, we know that Ghislaine Maxwell was the daughter, the youngest and the favorite daughter of Robert Maxwell, Israel's super spy, who not only stole hundreds of millions of pounds of people's pensions in Britain, but bought up some of the most influential newspapers like the Daily Mail in England, controlled vast amounts of espionage and of disinformation. And then there's the book Dead Men Tell No Tales. And definitely, if you believe Jeffrey Epstein killed himself, then you must be very gullible. Now, understanding Sabbateanism helps one understand the times and understand the threat that confronts us. I would never recommend this film. Movie Guide says it's pornographic, it's something we shouldn't want to support at all. But Stanley Kubrick is seen as something of a prophet within, and a truth teller within Hollywood. And he produced a film exposing the fact that there are very powerful, very well-placed people, leaders in the world, who have satanic rituals and sexual depravity parties and chateaus and villas outside of Paris and outside London and New York and so on. And this film, interestingly, Stanley Kubrick, within a few days of producing this film, died of a massive heart attack, apparently, they say. Now, he blew the whistle, basically. He exposed this kind of shocking depravity and debauchery and occultism of many important leaders in the world. But then there's another film, The Good Shepherd, which is considered a spectacular spy movie, where the skulls and bones are exposed. This is Yale University, where they have these secret initiation ceremonies where basically scare the poor person to death, humiliate them, get them to confess some secrets that can be used to blackmail them forever. And that the CIA was using Yale, and especially secret societies like Skulls and Bones, to recruit their next people, which includes people like Herbert Bush and George W. Bush and so on. Interesting, John Kerry, who once ran opposite George W. Bush, were Skulls and Bones members from the same university. And when they were questioned about it, said, "Isn't it strange that you both belong to secret society?" I said, "Yes, so secret we can't talk about it." And both sides refused to discuss this. But the CIA is apparently stocked by Skulls and Bones secret society members from Yale University. So we may think of the government running the population, but the government's run by international agencies, which are run by banks, which are run by the central banks, which are under the Illuminati at the top of it. And the more you go down the rabbit holes from these swamps, the more you discover that at the base, underneath it all, who's running the show, and it's a whole lot of Luciferian, Sabbatean, Freemasonry type groups. While they promise them freedom, they themselves are slaves of depravity. Now, Isaiah 59 declares, "Justice is turned back, righteousness stands afar off. Truth is fallen in the street, equity cannot enter." So truth fails, and he who departs from evil makes himself a prey. The moment you start to expose these things, your life is in jeopardy, or at least you're going to be deplatformed from social media, your bank accounts could get frozen, all sorts of horrible things can happen. You can suddenly find your websites hacked, your email, your computer interfered with, character assassination launched. You will be a prey. Jeremiah 7:28 says, "This is a Nathan that does not obey the voice of the Lord their God, nor receive correction. Truth has perished and has been cut off from their mouth." Revelation 12 verse 7 says, "And war broke out in heaven. The serpent of old, called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world." If you find yourself in agreement with what the world's teaching, you're being deceived. The world is deceived according to the Bible. So if you believe the world, when the world tells, whether it's the COVID cult, or salvation by vaccination, or evolutionism, or whatever it is, or Jeffrey Epstein killed himself, if we believe the world, we are being deceived. And they show it every now and then. Whenever there's a world event like the Paris Olympics, and we did a whole expose on that, they've got deaths riding on a white horse. And remember at the Commonwealth Games, the British had a woman riding the beast, and everyone bowing down to this beast. And this is at the Commonwealth Games in Birmingham. And now we've got the Winter Olympics opening ceremony where priestesses are calling on Apollo for the glory of Zeus to send them fire, and the whole world being united around a worship of occultic, Sabbatean type of influence. And you can see the hexagon here and the pentagram. Here's the pentagram. And right very central at the gates of the city, illuminated, everyone looking up and united in some kind of Sabbatean worship. Do not be deceived. God is not mocked. Whatever man sows, that shall he also reap. He who sows to the flesh will of the flesh reap corruption. He who sows to the Spirit will reap of the Spirit everlasting life. Ephesians 5:11 says, have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather expose them, which is what we're trying to do tonight. We are taught that Satan deceives the whole world, Revelation 12, verse 9. Whose minds the God of this age has blinded, who do not believe, lest the light of the gospel of the glory of Christ, who is the image of God, should shine on them. 2 Timothy 4, verse 3, for the time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine, but according to own desires, because they have itching ears, they will heap up for themselves teachers. They will turn their ears away from the truth and be turned aside to fables. 2 Corinthians 11, verse 3 says, but I fear lest somehow, as the serpent deceived Eve by his craftiness, so your minds might be corrupted from the simplicity that is in Christ. Revelation 20, verse 1 says, then I saw an angel coming down from heaven, having the key to the bottomless pit and a great chain in his hand. He laid hold of the dragon, that serpent of old, who is the devil and Satan, bound him for 1,000 years and cast him into the bottomless pit, shut him up and set a seal on him so that he might deceive the nations no more. Our nations are being deceived, and I think the Epstein files have proved that. We're being ruled by satanic pedophiles. Galatians 1, verse 10, for do I now persuade men or God? Or do I seek to please men? If I still sought to please men, I would not be a bondservant of Christ. We cannot please man and God at the same time. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. And all these verses are very relevant to what's going on today. So Psalm 94, verse 16 gives a call to all of us. Who will rise up for me against the evildoers? Who will make a stand for me against the workers of iniquity? We need to smash cultural Marxism, which is just another name for the Sabbateanism. Cultural Marxism grows out of the Frankfurt School of Marxism, the whole idea of being termites, the termite strategy to rot education, entertainment, news media, religious institutions in our society. This is, at the heart of cultural Marxism, is Sabbateanism.